welcome back. In this video we are going to talk about optional changing. This is a new topic and new feature for the features of object and also of arrays, which is called optional chaining, and this one is really amazing. So let's say that we wanted to get the opening hours of our restaurant for Monday, so we'll write the code here for that. Console.log, and then here we'll say restaurant dot opening hours dot Monday. So when we click that, here we are getting undefined, right? And since we are checking for Monday, here we have written here dot mon, okay, so which could stand for Monday. So actually this property doesn't exist, so you see that here we are getting the undefined, right? Let's pretend that we don't know whether the restaurant opens on Monday or not, and that could be the case. For example, if this data is coming from a real web service, so a web API, so and in that service there could be a multiple restaurants, not all of them would open on Monday, and so we had no way of knowing if this particular restaurant would open on Monday or not. But now let's go even further, because we now wanted to know exactly the hour on which the restaurant opens on Monday. So simply here we'll add here dot operator, and then here we'll say open. As you can see here, when we did that, here we are getting the error, right? Because the result of this was undefined, and then undefined dot open is really an error. So that's the error we get here. In order to avoid this error, we would first have to check, so if this here actually exists, so we could do something like this. Let's say here we'll remove this console.log if. So here we are setting the Monday, and then here we'll say console.log, and the previous statement here we'll write. So here the restaurant opening dot Monday. So let's run it. Now see here we don't get any error here. If we write the same code for Friday, for example, let me just copy this, and here we'll write here, let me say Friday, and also here let me write Friday. So this Friday here opens at 11, so here we are getting the 11. So for now we don't require Friday, let's just concentrate on Monday here now. So if the day that doesn't exist, and so now at least we get rid of the error here, right? So it's not a big deal to having this add dot logic here, but it doesn't make our code a little bit more unreadable and more messy. However, it is checking just for one property, so just for Monday. But now imagine the opening hours here would be optional, or in other words, that we might say restaurant objects can also would be optional, or in other words, that maybe the restaurant object can also not have opening hours. So in this case we have to check for both, right? So then here we have to write here, we have to here add the AND operator. So this is how we write when we want to check. So let me just say here this without chaining. So if restaurant.openHours.Monday exists, while only then unlocks the opening hours to the console, and then this can get out of hand pretty quickly when we have deeply nested objects with a lot of optional properties, and sometimes that happens in the real world. So therefore this ES 2020 introduced a great solution for this, which is a feature called optional chaining. So with the optional chaining, if a certain property does not exist, then undefined is returned immediately, so that it will avoid the all kind of errors that we saw earlier. And let's see how that works. Console.log restaurant dot opening hours dot Monday, and then here you use this question mark sign, and then here we'll say dot open. So this way here we get undefined here. Optional chaining works. So property before here the question mark, which is restaurant dot opening hours dot Monday. So here actually if it's here Monday exists, then this property will be read. from there. But if it not, then immediately it defines here undefined and it will be returned. And exists here actually means nullish concept that we already talked about before. See, property exists if not null and not undefined. Okay, if it's zero or empty string, then it will exits, of course. So let me just show you here. Let me just recreate this. And here let me just remove here this operator, and then here you are getting, see, undefined, so it is reading the undefined, right? So here it is stopping here with the undefined, it is not present, so here we are not getting. So here undefined it is trying to open, so here we are getting the error. So let me just go ahead and turn this off here now. Of course, we can have multiple optional chaining. So let's basically recreate what we have here. So in this example, we are just testing out for both the opening hours for Monday. So let me just create this one more time, and then here add a question mark, and then see here we are getting undefined. We don't know beforehand if they exist. So Monday is optional. So that's why we have this question mark here basically. And here it is asking if it exists, and then we can do the same for opening hours. And if the restaurant dot opening hours does not even exist, well, then the Monday property will not be read, so therefore we don't get the error. All right, so this makes it all easy to prevent all kind of bugs that sometimes we might not even expect. Okay, so it also takes away all the work of doing this simply by adding this question mark in here. But now let's see a little bit more real world example. For that, let me just grab the, so we'll grab this constant weekdays, right? So here we'll say example. Now here we'll write the for loop for, we'll say constant day of days, and then here we'll say console.log day. So indeed here we got the output here. So here the days, we want to use the variable name as the property name. So here we'll write restaurant dot opening hours, and then here we'll write this in day in square brackets because we want to use the variable name as the property name. So here we are using the square brackets, and let's just wrap this in the constant open, and then here we are using this chaining operator dot open. Here the opening hours is for Monday. Okay, here this question mark is for the optional chaining. Okay, and let's just go ahead and console.log. Here we'll say on day we open at open. So now let's see the result. As you can see here, we got the result. So let me just go ahead and turn this off for now. As you can see here, result on Monday, here we are undefined, Tuesday undefined, because Wednesday undefined. On Thursday we are getting 12, okay, Friday 11, and Saturday 0, like we have declared here as well, right? As you can see, Thursday, Friday, Saturday we are getting values because they are defined, and rest all undefined, so it is getting here undefined. So this works, but we don't want the undefined here. Just like before, we set a default value or operator, right? So let's set here the default to closed. Okay, so for using that, let me just write the code here. Let me just copy this and also paste it again here, and then after open we are using the here or operator. I'm using closed. Okay, let me just save it. So for now, let me just turn this off. As you can see here, now we got the output here. On Monday we are closed, on Tuesday we are closed, Wednesday we are closed, Thursday open, on Friday it is open, it is coming the time, and Saturday it is showing here closed because initially here above we declared here a 0, right? So 0 here it is taking it as closed. So like we already discussed about that here before. So here we use the nullish coalescing operator. So let me just show you that instead of here the or operator, when we use the nullishing coalescing operator, let me just save. Now here we got the for Saturday as well, the 0 is here. So this is an amazing use case of the optional chaining operator and the nullish coalescing operator works together, and in fact they are introduced to the language at the same time in ES 2020 because they were designed to work well with each other, and again both of them rely on this new concept of nullish, and so these nullish values are null and undefined. That's true both for the nullish coalescing operator and also for optional chaining. And now that you understand how this works, let's move on to the next topic, which is called here the methods. So essentially we check if a method actually exists before we call it. So let's say that console.log restaurant dot opening hours dot opening hours here question mark, and then here we are setting to dot 0 or 1. So I'll explain you in a bit. Let me just write the code here fully. So here method does not exist. So in this case here we are not using the opening hours. Let's checking for the order, right? Yeah, here in this method here we got the output, right? So similarly let me just copy this and paste it again, and let's say here the order, here we am searching here the order which is not defined in our object here above. So I'm saying here some order risotto here. As you can see here it says that a method does not exist, so this works as well. So let me just turn it off for now here, and here we get the explicit result we saw here, right? So we got the method does not exist. So just like before, this optional chaining operator will check if the order risotto actually exists, and if it doesn't then it will immediately return undefined. So all of this then returns undefined, right? So here in this nullishing coalescing operator will immediately go to the second part, and then this will get executed, so that previously we got here the uh, method does not exist. So as we can see here, and finally optional chaining works on arrays as well. So let's just say here the arrays. So basically we can use it to check if an array is empty. So let's simply create a users array. Okay, here let's say constant users. You're setting here the array, right? So let's say here the name Lohit I'm declaring, and then here I'm using here some random example here. So here I'm using this here as the demo. And now let's get the name of the first element of this array. So for that, let's go ahead and console.log, and here we'll say user. So here we'll say users of 0, and then here we'll use our the operator and dot name. So what do you think here the output is going to be here? See here we got Lohit. So here the optional chaining here tests here the value on the left side does exists. So here the users 0. Okay, so let me just here declare. Now you can see here this case we are declaring here the empty, right? So we'll just go ahead and simply here turn this off, and now we'll see here now the empty array it is here coming the users array empty. So without optional chaining we had to write like this. If there is no optional chaining, then we had to write like this: if users dot length 0, then user of 0 dot name else console.log. Here we use the user array. This also gives the same output. So without using this optional chaining operator, we have to write using the if and else statement. So here we get the both outputs same, as you can see. So that looks like a lot more work. Then let's just go ahead and turn here this off. You see that it doesn't work here because users is not getting defined. So because let me just go ahead and put this back on. Yeah, here users. See now here we got the both the same output. So we get used to this optional chaining operator. We use them together with the nullishing coalescing operator so that we can actually do something in the case we don't get a result from the object or from the array. So that's it for this video.